Okay, so very pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Robert Thornton, who's at the MESL Research Centre at Vincent Hall. So MESL is Minimum Essential Standard of Living. So yeah, take it away.
Rich, thank you. So, afternoon everyone, and thanks for asking me to be here today. So today I'm going to discuss what's an adequate income and how we go about measuring it. So first I look at what the minimum essential standard of living research is and how it sets out to answer the question of what's enough, what do people need to be able to live with dignity, and how much does that cost. We talk about what's involved in the research, how the figures are reached, and some of its uses and applications. I'll then move on to look at recent findings from the research, what it tells us about the adequacy of incomes in 2023, and lastly, I'll give an overview of our assessment of the measures from Budget 2024. So the Minimum Essential Standard of Living, or MESL for short, sets out to answer the question, what do people need to be able to live with dignity? What's an acceptable minimum for everyone, a level that no one should be expected to live below, which meets physical, psychological and social needs? So in this research, we use a consensual budget standards approach. This process brings members of the public from different backgrounds together in deliberative focus groups to discuss what's needed. They work together to discuss and agree the minimum goods and services that are required to live and take part in society at a socially acceptable level. And we do this through working in multiple stages of in-depth discussions. Multiple group meets, each builds on the work of the previous group to refine and produce a negotiated consensus on what people agree is essential. The research places an emphasis on needs, not wants, and produces itemised baskets detailing the full range of goods and services required for individuals and households to have a minimum but socially acceptable standard of living. So the research reflects the concepts which underpin the European Pillar of Social Rights principle that everyone has a right to an adequate minimum income which enables a life with dignity, and Irish government definitions of poverty and social inclusion. The budget standards research aims to translate these concepts into a practical benchmark by establishing the average weekly cost of the goods and services that people have agreed are essential to enabling a life of dignity. The MESL process involves deliberations with groups of people about what people and households require for a socially acceptable minimum standard. Through multiple phases of deliberative groups, each group building on the work of the last, the discussions draw on the lived experience of real people. They contribute their expertise on what individuals and households like them need. In the research, groups of people from different types of households work together. We talk to them to understand their needs and the needs of their household type. So older people talk about their needs. Working age people tell us what they need. Parents discuss the needs of both children and parents and children of multiple age groups. We also look at the additional and different needs of urban and rural households. The research has established the different needs for a range of household types that represent approximately 90% of household compositions in Ireland. So the group discussions to establish the MESL go through a range of basket categories, carefully considering needs and how needs are to be met. They discuss products and services, level of quality, etc. And where necessary, will deliberate on what's a need to have versus what's a nice to have. The focus is on establishing needs, not wants, and compiling a comprehensive list of the goods and services required to meet those needs. Through discussions, they come to agreement on the lists of needs and items across these multiple categories of expenditure. And the baskets covered a range of minimum needs, not just for survival, but enough for people to participate in society and live with dignity. As such, the contents of the baskets are comprehensive and wide-ranging, and they vary according to the needs of different types of household. There are thousands of items specified across the set of MESL baskets, and groups have discussed what's needed and why these things are important. And some examples can help to illustrate the kinds of deliberations and considerations that goes into specifying the list of needs and items. So in food, the groups agree a range of typical meals, the level of cooking from scratch that should be expected, and these options are reviewed by a nutritionist before a final basket is agreed. But in addition to normal day-to-day eating, other aspects of food are also included. So for older people living alone, being able to have a visitor is important, so there's extra included for them to be able to offer biscuits or cake to a visitor. For working age people and families, there's a takeaway once a month, both as a treat and as a break from cooking every day. For teenage children, the baskets include buying lunch at a deli counter once a week for a sense of inclusion with their peers. And every household foods basket also includes an allowance for extra food at Christmas. In the health category, we assume people are generally in good health, and so the basket includes various basic items such as plasters, painkillers, cough medicine, contraception, etc. And there's provision made for a number of GP visits per year, varying by age, and also prescriptions, visits to opticians and dentists. These costs are included, but they can be adjusted to reflect if a household would be eligible for a medical card or not. Personal care also has a social inclusion element. People need to be able to feel they can present themselves to a socially acceptable standard. So an acceptable minimum standard of living means being able to look after your personal hygiene. So there's items such as a toothbrush and toothpaste, soap, shower gel, shampoo, period products, etc. These are included in the personal care section of the basket. And there's also the energy costs for a daily shower are factored into household energy. And the baskets would include the likes of a haircut, such as every 6 weeks for a man and every 4 months for a woman. And there's a set of agreed makeup and cosmetics, razor and razor blades, and so forth. In clothing, the groups would agree the range and type of clothing people should have for different seasons and situations. For instance, there's casual items, but there's also smarter clothes for going to work. There's options for warmer and cooler weather. The groups agree quantities and lifespan. They balance price against quality and quantity to provide both a variety of outfits and the ability to replace worn-out clothing. And in recognition of the social inclusion needs of older children, the groups agree a minimum amount of branded items that should be included for this age group. In household goods, the baskets include a range of furnishings and appliances to allow for the home to be basically but comfortably furnished and adequately equipped. So there's enough seats that are included in the living area so a family can sit together. The kitchen table is large enough for the household to be able to eat together, and there's enough cutlery and crockery included in the basket for the household size. Things like blinds and curtains are included in the basket so people can have a feeling of privacy in their home. In addition to a ceiling light in each room, there's a lamp included in the living room to allow for lower levels of light and comfort. The budget also includes items for cleaning and maintenance, basic repainting every few years. But at the same time, furniture, flooring and so forth are expected to last a long time. For example, a sofa has a lifespan of 15 years in the basket, and stairs carpet is expected to last 10 years. In the social inclusion category, we include a range of items and activities that are discussed and agreed by the groups as the minimum required to meet the needs for participation and engagement. This varies by household type, but for example, school-aged children include participating in a team sport and attending several friends' birthday parties. The family baskets include 3 family trips to the cinema and 1 trip to the zoo per year. All adult baskets will have a modest socialising allowance so that people can occasionally meet a friend for coffee or go for a meal. The basket for an older person living alone includes a pet cat for a sense of company around the house. The groups also agreed that everyone needs a holiday as an opportunity to experience a break from the norm, and as a minimum they agreed that this can be met as a week's holiday in Ireland. So the MESL is the only research of this type in Ireland, and as such it provides a unique evidence-based benchmark for assessing the adequacy of social welfare supports, the minimum wage, in-work income supports and services. We update the MESL annually to reflect current prices, and we publish a report each year on the changing cost of a minimum standard of living. We also periodically review with groups the contents of the baskets to ensure that they stay relevant and reflect current minimum needs. The annual MESL data provides details of current minimum living costs and analysis of income needs to support the development of evidence-based policy recommendations. And through providing this continuous benchmark, the MESL research has become a part of the policy discourse around income adequacy, poverty and social inclusion. The research contributes to a number of collaborative efforts and practical applications, including the calculation of the living wage rate for Ireland since 2014, efforts to advocate for the benchmarking of social welfare rates to ensure an adequate minimum income, research to identify the additional and different needs arising from disability and caring. So the first of these was a project to establish the additional costs for an adult with a visual impairment, and then a second project identifying the minimum needs of a household caring for a child with a profound disability. And the MESL also provides the basis for the Irish Insolvency Service's reasonable living expenses. So while it's difficult to measure the impact of research on policy, the MESL has contributed evidence on what's required for an adequate income to annual budget deliberations on adjustments to social welfare rates and supports, and discussions on adjustments to the minimum wage and the need for a living wage. Specific policy examples include improvements in the living alone allowance, which was supported by the MESL analysis demonstrating the consistent higher risk of income inadequacy for older people living alone when relying on the state pension. We also saw the introduction of a higher rate of social welfare support for households with older children in 2019. And this followed consistent MESL findings demonstrating that older children's minimum needs cost approximately 60% more than younger children. Our analysis of household minimum energy costs demonstrated the importance of fuel allowance as a core income support, and this remains so in the context of households with energy efficiency improvements. And this research was cited in the government strategy to combat energy poverty. So each year, as I said, we update the cost of the MESL baskets through a combination of repricing and inflation adjustments to reflect minimum living costs in March of the current year. We present the updated findings in our annual update report, which is published in June. And so now I'm just going to look briefly at some of the findings from this year's annual update on the change in the MESL costs and the adequacy of social protection supports this year. So in 2023, we found a considerable rise in the cost of MESL across all household types, with an average increase of 10.6% nationally. So it's a 12.9% increase for urban households and 5.7% increase for rural households. And this was higher than the national average change measured by the Consumer Price Index. CPI measured a 7.7% increase for the same period. But the CPI measures the average change in prices for all households. The MESL is focused on the basket of goods needed for a minimum standard of living. This means basics like energy and food comprise a larger share of the minimum basket, and together they account for a third of the MESL basket compared to approximately a sixth of the CPI basket. As a result, the MESL is more sensitive to changes in food and energy prices. And CSO analysis of the CPI has found that lower income households have experienced above average inflation, while higher income households have had a lower rate of inflation. And this is mainly due to increases in food and energy prices having a greater impact on low income households. So over the last 3 years, from 2020, the MESL has shown a cumulative increase of 18.9%, which is 4 percentage points higher than that measured by the CPI. So food inflation, as measured by the CPI, was 13.1% for the year to March. And this is an exceptionally high level. Haven't seen inflation at this level since the 1980s. And on the trend of more recent years, food inflation in excess of 1% is exceptional. We repriced the MESL food basket this March, and we found an increase in the minimum food costs of 20.8%. And in the MESL basket, we saw a significant increase in the price of most items, but particularly in staples, which can make up a large share of the household's minimum food basket. For example, milk increased by 54%, eggs had gone up by 32%, butter 72%, and bread had increased by 67%. And as these items represent a large proportion of the food basket for households with children, these household types showed the greatest increase in minimum food costs. The cost of the minimum healthy food basket in the MESL would potentially consume a large share of a household's social welfare income in 2023. For example, up to a third of a household with one parent and 2 children in receipt of the job seeker's transitional payment. Home energy costs have also increased significantly over this period. The CPI measured an average increase of 33% in home energy costs in the 12 months to March of this year, and a 98% increase since 2020. Home energy costs in the MESL vary by household type and area, but have increased significantly for all household types over the last 3 years. So in the 12 months to March this year, home energy prices in the MESL basket increased by 64% for urban-based households using natural gas, and 6% for rural-based households using home heating oil. And this is due to the significant increase in gas prices, which increased by 93%, compared to a slight decrease in home heating oil of 13%. So over the last 3 years, the MESL home energy costs increased by 117% for urban households and 76% for rural households. So we see that the vulnerability to energy poverty then has also increased significantly. Our analysis finds that the proportion of a social welfare recipient's income needed to meet energy costs has increased and now exceeds 10% in most of the cases that we examined, as income supports and energy-related benefits have not kept pace with the increasing energy and living costs. So it's notable in this case that the real value of the fuel allowance has fallen significantly. For example, fuel allowance provided to a lone parent household in 2020 would have met 45% of their minimum energy needs, but in 2023 this has fallen to meeting 27%. So our findings this year show that income supports provided by the social protection system haven't kept pace with the change in minimum living costs. As a result, the position of all household cases examined has declined. There are a minority of household situations showing inadequate income this year, and for these, the income buffer above the MESL threshold has decreased. For the majority of cases we examine, social welfare does not provide an adequate income in 2023, and the degree of inadequacy is deeper than it was last year. So in our annual analysis, we measure the adequacy of social welfare incomes for 214 test household cases. We look at the pattern of income adequacy and inadequacy, and the depth of income inadequacy and how it changes year to year. So we've tended to find that the household types in deep income inadequacy, that's where social welfare meets less than 90% of minimum living costs, are working age single adult headed households. So that's one parent households and single adults without children. And also household compositions with older children. So last year, our analysis found deep inadequacy in 31% of the cases examined. This year, we find deep inadequacy, the dark area of the chart, has widened hugely to 59% of cases examined, and income adequacy has contracted significantly. The incidence of deep inadequacy is now spread to a wider range of household types and compositions, along with a deepening of the inadequacy found amongst those households with older children and one adult-headed households, as social welfare now meets a lower proportion of MESL need. This analysis is based on the current 2023 social welfare rates and took into account the spring 23 cost of living supports and 2 electricity credits that were paid in the first half of the year. And without these additional one-off supports, the deep inadequacy would have been found in 66% of cases. So one adult-headed households, as I've said, demonstrate a greater rate of income inadequacy and deep income inadequacy than 2 adult-headed households. In this example here, an unemployed adult living alone in private accommodation in Dublin, the combination of a full job seekers payment and rent supplement is deeply inadequate, meets 77% of their minimum living costs. If they're a long-term social welfare recipient, and they'd qualify for certain additional benefits, which would bring the income to 86% of MESL need. Our analysis finds that there are significant economies of scale available to 2 adult households compared to a 1 adult household. For example, in the areas of home energy, household services and household goods. And these result in the MESL costs for 2 adult households being approximately 1.5 times that of a 1 adult headed household. But social welfare rates underestimate the costs faced in the 1 adult headed households compared to 2 adult households. And this contributes to the working age single adult household type consistently demonstrating deep income inadequacy in our analysis. For households with children then, social welfare supports provide an adequate income in only 12% of the cases we examined. This is down from 29% last year. And this is due to the income supports falling short of meeting the MESL costs for the adults and the children of 3 out of the 40 age groups we examined in our research. So here we're going to look at the example of a 2-parent household and a 1-parent household, each with 2 children, one of primary school age and one of second level age, living in social housing in an urban area. So the MESL costs for the adults are in blue, are compared to the social welfare income in yellow, and the shortfall is indicated by the shaded area. So you can see that the adult social welfare supports meets 87% of the costs for the 2 parents, but for the adult in a 1-parent household, the personal rate plus fuel allowance and other secondary supports meets 84% of the MESL costs. The MESL costs then for an older child of second level age are an average of €149 per week. And we've consistently found that older children have the highest MESL costs of all child age groups. This is due to the additional needs of this age group. And our research has consistently found that households with older children are more likely to show deep income inadequacy as a result. So social welfare supports, including the higher rate of qualified child payment and the increased back to school allowance that was paid this year, meet 61% of the MESL costs for an older child. And for a primary school child, the MESL costs are €94 per week. And this is inclusive of the new free primary school book scheme that was introduced this year. So social welfare supports for this age group meet 86% of MESL costs. So we can see that the social welfare supports fall short of meeting the minimum needs for each individual in these households, and the cumulative result is deep income inadequacy in both cases. The shortfall in the adult rates is compounded by the shortfall in the child rates, and the further inadequacy of supports for the 1 adult-headed households and older children results in a deeper level of inadequacy for these households. So drawing down on the findings of the annual MESL update, we provide evidence-based policy recommendations to feed into the budget process each year. And following the announcement of the budget, we examined the potential impact of the budget measures on income adequacy. So now I'll discuss the findings of our impact assessment of Budget 24, focusing on the change in MESL costs and the adjustments to social protection supports. So as I mentioned earlier, the core MESL basket cost increased by an average of 10.6% in the year to March 2023, with a cumulative increase in the core MESL cost of 18.9% over the last 3 years. The overall level of change has primarily been driven by a rising cost of home energy over the last 2 years, and food inflation became an additional factor in the last year. As energy and food comprise a larger proportion of the MESL basket than the average basket measured by CPI, increases in this area have a greater impact on the change in MESL costs than on the CPI rate. So to examine budget 2024, we need an estimate of the potential MESL costs for next year, taking account of the greater impact of food and energy inflation. So we produced this using HICP forecasts from the central bank, applying forecast rates for food, energy and core inflation to the respective parts of the MESL baskets. Applying these projections indicates that the gross core MESL costs are likely to increase by 9.1% going into 2024. However, with the two electricity credits of €150 each due to be paid in early 24, this reduces the forecast net change to 7.6%. And so while this is a lower rate of change compared to the 10.6% we saw from 2022 to 23, it compounds the impact of the double-digit inflation for essential goods and services that was experienced coming into this year. Based on this projection, there's the potential for a cumulative increase in core MESL costs of 27.9% from 2020 to 2024. So we can compare then the relative value of social welfare supports for 2024 to the forecast MESL costs for the next year. Here we compare core social welfare rates to the MESL needs of the head of household adults and also children of primary school and second level age groups. Our analysis finds that the nominal adjustments from 2020 to 2024 have not maintained the real value of social welfare rates relative to minimum living costs, and as such, the real value of core social protection rates has been cut. The core weekly social protection rates and standard secondary benefits such as fuel allowance are forecast to meet a lower percentage of MESL need in 2024 than they did this year, and a substantially lower level when compared to 2020. For example, for the adult in a one-parent household, the value of the one-parent family payment personal rate, the fuel allowance and also the Christmas bonus is forecast to have fallen by 12 percentage points. It will meet approximately 81% of MESL need next year compared to meeting 93% in 2020. Similarly, for an older adult, the non-contributory state pension and secondary supports, including the living alone allowance, met 105% of MESL need in 2020. But in 2024, the value of these is forecast to reduce to meeting 86% of MESL needs. The relative value of supports for children was improving up to 2022, reaching 89% of minimum needs at primary level and 65% for older children at second level. But it's estimated that the relative value will fall to meeting 81% of costs for a primary school child and 59% of costs for a second level child next year. And these estimates take into account the introduction of the free school books at primary level this year and junior cycle next year. So we repeat our analysis of the 214 test household cases using the forecast MESL costs for next year. We assess the adequacy of the 2024 core social welfare rate adjustments and also include all the cost of living once-off supports and measures which are due to be provided in 2024. These include a January cost of living bonus payment to long-term social welfare recipients and the two €150 electricity credits. The analysis finds a further deepening and widening of the income inadequacy that developed this year. As we've seen, the cumulative impact of rising living costs has resulted in the real value of core social welfare rates reducing relative to minimum living costs. The supplementary supports announced as part of Budget 24 do not adequately address the inflation gap which has grown between social protection rates and expenditure needs. So in 2024, 69% of cases are forecast to demonstrate deep income inadequacy. A further 24% of cases demonstrate an inadequate income that's within 10% of meeting minimum needs. So overall, 93% of cases are projected to demonstrate income inadequacy, with 7% of cases showing an adequate income. So, to conclude, the research has measured the impact of recent inflation on minimum living costs, demonstrating the higher rate of increase to date and the potential for cumulative increases to reach approximately 28% next year. This increase in minimum living costs exceeds the adjustments to social protection supports. The real value of core social protection supports is falling, with working age rates forecast to meet 6 to 12 percentage points less in 2024 than they did in 2020. The once-off cost of living measures are not enough to bridge this gap. The Budget 2024 measures are likely to compound the deepening and widening of income inadequacy that developed this year. In 2024, 93% of cases are projected to demonstrate income inadequacy, with 7% of cases showing an adequate income. By comparison, in 2020, 28% of cases demonstrated an adequate income and 72% showed an inadequate income. To Today, I focus on our analysis of household cases dependent on social welfare, but the full analysis includes discussion of the change in household energy costs and assessment of the value of related supports. We also present further data on the change in food costs, finding an average increase of 2.9% in the cost of the MESL food basket in the 6 months from March to September of this year. The analysis also looks at employed income scenarios, examining the change in the national minimum wage and its impact on household income adequacy. And in that, we highlight the interaction of the change in the minimum wage with in-work supports for households with children. So while the budget included adjustments to the working family payment income thresholds related to the change in the minimum wage, eligibility thresholds and income disregards weren't consistently adjusted across all supports. So, for example, our analysis highlights potential issues with the thresholds for the one-parent family payment and job seekers transitional payment. These haven't been adjusted in line with the minimum wage, and it's likely that recipients in minimum wage employment will receive a lower rate of support next year as a result. Similarly, the National Childcare Scheme thresholds have not moved in line with changes to the minimum wage, and as a result, minimum wage employees will be eligible for a lower rate of subvention next year than they would have received in 2020. Finally, find more information, including the most recent 2023 report and our Budget 24 analysis on the Research Centre's website, budgeting.ie. And we also have a new working paper coming out on Thursday, which examines the cost of adequately heating the home and considers an alternative approach to supporting households meeting those energy costs. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.